The morning sun cast long shadows across the royal palace grounds as Captain Marcus Williams adjusted his ceremonial uniform. At 32 years old, he had served the palace guard for 8 years, never imagining that this ordinary Tuesday would change everything. The brass buttons on his red coat gleamed as he walked his regular patrol route along the eastern wall. Marcus had grown up in a small village outside the capital, dreaming of serving his country. His father worked as a blacksmith and his mother taught at the local school. They had saved every penny to give their son a proper education, hoping he would make something of himself. When Marcus received his appointment to the Royal Guard, his parents wept with pride. The palace stood majestically against the morning sky, its white stone walls reflecting centuries of history. Tourists gathered at the main gates, cameras clicking as they tried to capture the perfect shot. Marcus nodded politely to visitors, his trained eyes constantly scanning for anything unusual. The daily routine included checking security barriers, monitoring crowd behavior, and ensuring no unauthorized persons entered restricted areas. As he rounded the corner near the Rose Garden, Marcus noticed a figure moving quickly through the shadows. The man wore a dark hoodie pulled low over his face, which immediately raised suspicion. Palace grounds had strict dress codes for visitors, and covering one's face was strictly prohibited. Marcus quickened his pace, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio. The stranger seemed to sense he was being watched. He glanced nervously over his shoulder, then began walking faster toward the restricted section of the palace grounds. This area housed important government offices and was off-limits to the public. Marcus knew he had to intercept the man before he reached the security checkpoint. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus called out in his authoritative but polite voice. "I need to speak with you for a moment." The hooded figure froze for several seconds, then slowly turned around. Marcus could see nervous sweat beading on the man's forehead despite the cool morning air. Something about his body language screamed danger. Years of training had taught Marcus to trust his instincts, and every alarm bell in his head was ringing. "Is there a problem, officer?" the man asked, his voice shaky and uncertain. Marcus stepped closer, maintaining a safe distance while keeping his posture non-threatening. He had learned that approaching suspicious individuals required a delicate balance of authority and diplomacy. Too aggressive, and situations could escalate quickly. Too passive, and security risks increased exponentially. Palace regulations require all visitors to keep their faces visible at all times, Marcus explained calmly. "I'm going to need you to remove your hood and show me some identification." The stranger's hands trembled as he reached toward his hood. But instead of complying with the request, he suddenly stepped backward, his eyes darting around the courtyard as if looking for escape routes. Marcus immediately recognized the signs of someone planning to run, or, worse, someone preparing to do something dangerous. "Sir, I need you to stay calm and follow my instructions," Marcus said, his tone becoming more firm. "Remove your hood slowly and keep your hands where I can see them." What happened next would forever change both men's lives. The stranger's hand moved not to his hood, but toward something concealed beneath his jacket. Marcus saw the telltale bulge of a weapon and realized this was no ordinary trespasser. His training kicked in automatically, muscle memory from countless hours of preparation taking over his conscious thought. The peaceful morning atmosphere shattered in an instant. Birds scattered from nearby trees as the tension in the air became palpable. Other guards in the distance began moving toward their location, sensing something was wrong through their communication network. The tourists at the main gate continued taking photos, completely unaware that a potentially deadly situation was developing just yards away. Marcus found himself face to face with what appeared to be an armed intruder on royal property. His mind raced through protocols and procedures while his body prepared for the worst-case scenario. Everything he had trained for, every simulation he had practiced, had led to this moment. The next few minutes would test every skill he possessed and determine whether he would return. Home to his family that evening, the stranger's eyes held a desperate look that Marcus had seen before in men who felt they had nothing left to lose. These were the most dangerous encounters because unpredictability replaced rational thought. Marcus knew he had to stay calm, think clearly, and find a way to resolve the situation without anyone getting hurt. Time seemed to slow as both men stared at each other, each calculating their next move. The morning that had started so peacefully was about to become a test of courage, training, and human nature that neither man could have anticipated. The stranger's hand emerged from his jacket clutching a black pistol. its metal surface gleaming ominously in the morning sunlight. Marcus felt his heart pound as he stared down the barrel of the weapon, every second stretching into what felt like an eternity. His training had prepared him for this moment, but facing an armed threat in reality felt completely different from any simulation. "Don't move another step," the gunman hissed, his voice now filled with desperate aggression. "I'm warning you, stay back." Marcus raised his hand slowly, showing his palms while keeping his body positioned to move quickly if necessary. He could see the man's finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger, and one wrong move could end everything. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders as he realized other people's safety now depended on his actions. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said calmly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "What's your name?" "Let's talk about this." The gunman laughed bitterly, a sound that echoed off the palace walls. "Talk? You think talking is going to solve anything? Do you have any idea what they've done to me?" Through his peripheral vision, Marcus could see other guards taking positions around the courtyard. Protocol demanded they establish a perimeter and call for backup. But he also knew that too much pressure might cause the armed man to panic. The situation balanced on a knife's edge, with one wrong decision potentially leading to tragedy. "My name is Marcus," he said, trying to establish a human connection. "I'd like to understand what's happening here. Who has done something to you?" The stranger wiped sweat from his forehead with his free hand, the gun never wavering from its target. "Marcus, right? Well, Marcus, let me tell you about justice. Let me tell you about what happens when the system fails people like me." As the man spoke, Marcus began to piece together clues about his identity. The accent suggested local origin, possibly from the working-class districts outside the capital. His clothes, though worn, had once been of decent quality. The desperation in his eyes spoke of someone who had lost everything and saw no other options remaining. 3 months ago," the gunman continued, his voice cracking with emotion, "I was a different person. I had a job, a family, a future. I worked at the textile factory for 15 years, never missed a day, never caused trouble. Then the government decided to shut us down for some development project." Marcus listened carefully, recognizing that allowing the man to talk might be the key to resolving the situation peacefully. Behind the anger and desperation, he could hear genuine pain and frustration. This wasn't a career criminal or terrorist, but someone who felt wronged by the system. "They promised us compensation," the stranger went on, tears mixing with sweat on his face. "They said we'd get new jobs, that our families would be taken care of. But those were all lies. We got nothing. My wife left me when I couldn't pay the rent. My children won't even look at me anymore." The morning air carried the sound of distant sirens as emergency services responded to the alert. Marcus knew he had limited time before the situation would escalate beyond his control. Negotiators and tactical teams would arrive soon, but by then it might be too late to resolve things peacefully. "I understand you're angry," Marcus said, taking a small step forward. "What happened to you wasn't fair, but this isn't going to solve anything. There are people who can help you. Legal ways to fight for what you deserve." The gunman shook his head violently. "Legal ways? I tried that. I filed complaints, attended hearings, waited in government offices for hours only to be told to come back another day. The system doesn't care about people like me. We're just numbers to them, obstacles to be removed." Marcus felt a deep sympathy for the man's situation. He had grown up in similar circumstances and knew how difficult it could be for ordinary people to navigate bureaucratic systems. The difference was that Marcus had found a path forward through service, while this man had apparently reached his breaking point. "What's your name?" Marcus asked again, hoping to continue building rapport. "David," the man replied after a long pause. "David Thompson. Not that it matters anymore. After today, I'll either be dead or in prison for the rest of my life." The admission sent chills through Marcus. David wasn't just making threats. He was prepared to die rather than continue living with his current circumstances. This realization changed everything about how Marcus needed to approach the situation. "David, listen to me," Marcus said, his voice filled with genuine concern. "Your life matters. Your story matters. What happened to you was wrong, but ending it this way won't make it right. It will just create more pain for everyone involved." David's grip on the weapon tightened, and Marcus could see the internal battle playing out across his features. Years of disappointment and desperation warred against whatever hope might still exist deep inside. The next few moments would determine which side would win. David Thompson's story poured out like water from a broken dam, each word carrying years of accumulated pain and frustration. Marcus listened intently, understanding that this might be the first time in months that anyone had actually heard David's complete story without judging or dismissing him. After the factory closed, "They gave us 2 weeks' notice," David continued, his voice trembling with barely controlled emotion. 2 weeks to find new work, to figure out how to feed our families. The government officials came in their expensive cars, made speeches about progress and modernization, then disappeared back to their comfortable offices. Marcus noticed that David's grip on the weapon had relaxed slightly as he spoke, though it remained pointed in his direction. This was encouraging, as it suggested that talking was having some effect. The key was to keep David focused on his story rather than on whatever desperate plan had brought him here. "My youngest daughter, Sarah, she's only 8 years old," David said, his eyes growing distant. "She used to wait for me at the door every evening when I came home from work. She'd run to me with her arms open, telling me about her day at school. Now she barely speaks to me because she doesn't understand why Daddy can't buy her the things she needs." The morning sun had climbed higher, casting different shadows across the courtyard. Marcus was acutely aware that time was working against them. More security personnel had arrived and were positioned strategically around the area, but they maintained their distance on his signal. Everyone understood that rushing the situation could have catastrophic consequences. "Where are your children now, David?" Marcus asked, genuinely interested in the answer. "Living with their mother's sister across town," David replied, pain evident in every word. "My wife, Jennifer, she tried to stand by me at first. She took on extra shifts at the restaurant where she worked, but it wasn't enough. The stress of trying to keep our family together while I fell apart, it destroyed our marriage." Marcus felt a deep ache in his chest as he imagined the dissolution of David's family. He thought about his own wife, Sarah, and their young son, Michael. The idea of losing them due to circumstances beyond his control was almost unbearable to contemplate. "The worst part," David continued, "was watching Jennifer lose faith in me. She'd come home exhausted from working double shifts, and I'd still be sitting at the kitchen table with rejection letters and empty job applications. I could see the disappointment in her eyes growing stronger every day." David wiped his face with his free hand, smearing tears across his cheek. The gun wavered slightly, but Marcus didn't dare make any sudden movements. He could sense that David was lost in his memories, reliving the painful dissolution of his life. "I started drinking," David admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not because I wanted to, but because it was the only way to stop thinking about how I'd failed everyone who depended on me. Jennifer found bottles hidden around the house and gave me an ultimatum. Get help or get out." Marcus nodded understandingly. He had seen similar situations during his community service work before joining the Palace Guard. Economic hardship often triggered cascading failures in people's lives, and those without strong support systems frequently found themselves in impossible situations. "I tried to get help," David said, his voice growing stronger again. "I went to counseling, attended job training programs, applied for government assistance. But everywhere I turned, I encountered the same bureaucratic maze. Forms to fill out, requirements I couldn't meet, waiting lists that seemed to go on forever. The sound of helicopters could be heard in the distance, indicating that the media had gotten wind of the situation. Marcus knew this would add pressure to resolve things quickly, as prolonged standoffs rarely ended well once they became public spectacles. "David, I want you to know that I hear you," Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. "What you've been through isn't fair, and the system should have done better by you and your family. But I also know that you're not a violent person. Everything you've told me shows that you're a man who loves his family and worked hard to provide for them." David looked directly at Marcus for the first time since revealing the weapon. There was surprise in his eyes, as if he hadn't expected anyone to see him as anything other than a dangerous criminal. "You really think that?" David asked, vulnerability replacing some of the desperation in his voice. "I know that," Marcus replied firmly. "The man who worked 15 years without missing a day, who tried counseling and job training even when everything seemed hopeless, who still talks about his daughter waiting at the door with such love in his voice. That's who you really are." For a moment, the weapon lowered slightly as David processed Marcus's words. It was the first opening Marcus had seen, and he knew this might be the crucial turning point in their confrontation. Marcus seized the moment when David's weapon lowered, not to make any aggressive moves but to deepen their connection through shared understanding. He could see that beneath David's desperation lay a fundamentally decent man who had been pushed beyond his breaking point by circumstances beyond his control. "David, can I tell you something about my own family?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle but clear. "My father worked in a mill that closed when I was 16. I watched him go through exactly what you're describing. The rejection letters, the failed interviews, the slow erosion of his self-worth." David's eyes widened with surprise and interest. He hadn't expected this palace guard, this representative of the establishment, to understand his situation from personal experience. "What happened to him?" David asked, the weapon now pointing toward the ground rather than at Marcus. "It took him 2 years to find steady work again," Marcus replied honestly. 2 years of watching my mother work 2 jobs while he struggled with depression and anger. There were times when he talked about giving up entirely, when the shame of not being able to provide for his family nearly broke him. Marcus could see that his story was having an impact. David was listening intently, perhaps recognizing similarities between his own experience and that of Marcus's father. "But here's the thing, David," Marcus continued. "My father didn't give up, even when everything seemed hopeless. And eventually, things started to turn around. Not quickly, not easily, but they did improve. He found work at a smaller company. We kept our family together, and I was able to pursue my education and career." David shook his head, frustration returning to his voice. "That was different. Your father had options. The economy was different then. Everything is harder now." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the validity of David's point. "You're right that things are different now, and in many ways more difficult. But David, what you're planning to do here today won't bring your family back or solve the problems with the system. It will just ensure that your daughter Sarah never gets to wait by the door for you again." The mention of his daughter's name seemed to hit David like a physical blow. His shoulders sagged and tears began flowing more freely down his face. The gun trembled in his hand as the full weight of his situation became clear to him. "She doesn't even know I'm here," David whispered. "Jennifer doesn't let me see the children anymore. She says I'm too unstable, too dangerous to be around them. Maybe she's right." "No, David," Marcus said firmly. "You're not dangerous. You're hurt, you're desperate, and you feel like you've run out of options. But threatening someone with a gun isn't going to convince your wife that you're stable enough to see your children. In fact, it's going to prove the opposite." David looked up at the palace walls towering above them, then back at Marcus. "I just wanted someone to listen," he said, his voice breaking. "I wanted someone with power to understand what their decisions cost real people like me and my family." Marcus felt a surge of empathy mixed with hope. This was the breakthrough he had been working toward. David was finally articulating his real motivation, which wasn't violence but simply the need to be heard and acknowledged. "I'm listening, David," Marcus said. "And I hear you. But there are better ways to make your voice heard. Ways that won't destroy what's left of your relationship with your children, or end with you in prison or worse." David wiped his eyes and looked around the courtyard, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. The reality of where he was and what he was doing seemed to be sinking in. Marcus could sense the internal battle raging within the man as different parts of his psyche fought for control. "What am I doing here?" David muttered, more to himself than to Marcus. "This isn't who I am. This isn't who I want to be." "You're right," Marcus agreed. "This isn't who you are. You're a father who loves his children, a man who worked hard his whole life, someone who deserves better than what happened to you. But David, it's not too late to step back from this path and find a different way forward." The weapon in David's hand seemed to grow heavier, as the adrenaline that had carried him this far began to fade. Marcus could see exhaustion replacing desperation in the man's posture and expression. "I don't know how to step back," David admitted. "I don't know where to go from here. Even if I put this gun down, nothing has changed. I'll still be unemployed, my family will still be gone, and the system will still ignore people like me." Marcus knew this was the critical moment. David had acknowledged the futility of his current course of action, but he needed to see a viable alternative before he would be willing to surrender. Marcus knew he had to offer David something concrete, something more than empty reassurances that things would magically improve. The man needed practical hope, not platitudes, if he was going to step back from this dangerous precipice. "David, I want to make you a promise," Marcus said, his voice filled with conviction. "If you put that weapon down right now, I personally guarantee that your story will be heard by people who can make a difference. I have connections with social services, employment agencies, and legal aid organizations that might be able to help you in ways you haven't tried yet." David's expression showed a flicker of interest mixed with skepticism. "You'd really do that? Even after I threatened you with a gun?" "Especially because you threatened me with a gun," Marcus replied. "Because that's not who you really are, and I can see that. You're not a criminal, David. You're a desperate man who ran out of options and made a terrible decision in a moment of pain. There's a difference." Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket, moving deliberately so David wouldn't perceive any threat. He pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen," Marcus said, holding up the card. "She runs a veterans support program, but she also works with civilians who are facing similar challenges. She's helped dozens of men in situations similar to yours find their way back to stability and reunite with their families." David stared at the card, as if it represented something he had thought was impossible. A potential lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "But why would you help me?" David asked, confusion evident in his voice. "I pointed a gun at you. Most people would just want me arrested and forgotten." Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Because I've seen what happens when good people get pushed beyond their limits by circumstances they can't control. My job isn't just to protect this building or the people in it. It's to serve the community, and that includes people like you who need help finding their way back." David's grip on the weapon had loosened considerably, though he hadn't yet made the decision to put it down completely. Marcus could see the internal struggle continuing as hope battled against years of disappointment and cynicism. "What if Lieutenant Chen can't help either?" David asked. "What if this is just another dead end like all the others?" "Then we'll find someone who can help," Marcus replied without hesitation. "David, I give you my word as a palace guard and as a man who understands what your family went through, I won't abandon you if you give this a chance." The sound of approaching footsteps indicated that other security personnel were getting restless, waiting for some kind of resolution. Marcus knew he needed to bring this to a conclusion soon, but he also sensed that David was very close to making the right decision. "Your daughter Sarah," Marcus said, playing what he hoped would be the deciding card. "What would you want her to remember about her father? That he was the man who worked 15 years without missing a day and loved her enough to wait by the door for her every evening? Or that he was the man who threw away his last chance to be in her life by making one terrible decision in a moment of desperation?" David's face crumpled as the full implications of Marcus's words hit him. The weapon in his hand began to shake as sobs racked his body. "I just miss her so much," David cried. "I miss tucking her in at night and reading her stories. I miss helping her with homework and taking her to the park on weekends. I miss being a father." "Then be her father," Marcus said gently. "Be the man she needs you to be. Put the gun down, David. Let me help you find a way back to your family." David looked at the weapon in his hand as if seeing it for the first time. His finger, which had been hovering near the trigger for what felt like hours, moved away to a safe position. Marcus held his breath, knowing that the next few seconds would determine the outcome of this entire confrontation. "If I put this down," David said slowly, "will you really help me? This isn't just something you're saying to get me to surrender." "I give you my word," Marcus replied solemnly. "If you put that weapon down and trust me to help you find a better path forward, I will do everything in my power to make that happen." David looked up at the palace walls one more time, then at Marcus's earnest face. Slowly, very slowly, he began to lower the gun toward the ground. The moment David placed the weapon on the ground marked the end of the immediate crisis. But Marcus knew it was just the beginning of a much longer journey toward redemption and healing. As other guards moved in to secure the firearm, Marcus stepped forward and placed a protective hand on David's shoulder. "Easy, everyone," Marcus called out to his colleagues. "Mr. Thompson is cooperating fully. Let's handle this with dignity and respect." David raised his hands without being asked, tears still streaming down his face but his posture showing relief rather than defeat. "Thank you," he whispered to Marcus. "I don't know what came over me. I've never done anything like this before in my life. I know you haven't, Marcus replied, maintaining his protective stance. We're going to get through this together. David, the first step is behind us now. As protocol required, David was handcuffed for everyone's safety, but Marcus ensured the process was handled with as much compassion as possible. He explained each step to David beforehand and stayed close to provide reassurance during what had to be a terrifying experience. This is standard procedure, Marcus explained. You'll be taken to the station for processing, but I want you to know that I'll be speaking with the officers there about your situation. Your cooperation here today will be noted in all reports. Lieutenant Sarah Chen arrived within 30 minutes of Marcus's call, just as David was being prepared for transport. Marcus had filled her in on the basic situation, and she approached with the kind of professional warmth that immediately put people at ease. Mr. Thompson, she said, extending her hand despite the handcuffs. Captain Williams told me about your conversation today. I want you to know that what you're going through is more common than you might think, and there are people who want to help. David looked skeptical, but hopeful. He said you might be able to assist me with finding work and possibly getting back in touch with my family. Those are definitely areas where we've had success with other clients, Lieutenant Chen confirmed. But David, I need you to understand that this is going to be a process. There are no quick fixes or magic solutions. It's going to require commitment and hard work on your part. I'm ready to work, David said, more conviction in his voice than Marcus had heard all morning. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to get my life back on track. Marcus felt a surge of pride and hope as he watched this transformation. The desperate, dangerous man who had threatened him with a gun was revealing himself to be exactly what Marcus had suspected. A fundamentally good person who had lost his way and needed guidance back to solid ground. The legal proceedings that followed were complicated but not insurmountable. Marcus testified about David's cooperation and the circumstances that had led to the confrontation. The judge, after hearing the full story and reviewing David's clean criminal record, agreed to a plea arrangement that included mandatory counseling and community service rather than prison time. 3 weeks after the incident, Marcus received a call from Lieutenant Chen with an update on David's progress. He's been attending counseling sessions religiously, she reported. We've also connected him with a job training program for renewable energy technicians. It's a growing field, and the training includes guaranteed placement assistance. What about his family situation? Marcus asked, genuinely concerned about the outcome. That's going to take more time, Lieutenant Chen admitted. His wife is understandably cautious about reconciliation, but she's agreed to family counseling sessions. The children miss their father, which is a positive sign. Marcus felt a deep satisfaction knowing that his decision to treat David with compassion rather than simply as a security threat was paying dividends. It reinforced his belief that every person deserved a chance at redemption when they were willing to do the work required. 2 months later, Marcus was surprised to receive a handwritten letter at the palace. The envelope was addressed in careful, neat handwriting to Captain Marcus Williams, Palace Guard. Inside was a simple but heartfelt message. Dear Captain Williams, the letter began. I wanted you to know that I started my new job last week as a solar panel installation trainee. The pay isn't great yet, but it's honest work with good people, and there's room for advancement. Jennifer has agreed to let me see Sarah and the kids for supervised visits, and we're all going to counseling together. I know I have a long way to go to earn back their trust, but for the first time in months I have hope that it's possible. Thank you for seeing the man I used to be and helping me find my way back to him. I will never forget your kindness. The letter was signed simply David Thompson. 6 months after that terrifying morning in the palace courtyard, Marcus received an invitation that brought tears to his eyes. The envelope was decorated with colorful drawings of flowers and hearts, clearly the work of a child's hand. Inside was an invitation to Sarah Thompson's 9th birthday party, with a handwritten note from David. Captain Williams, the note read, Sarah asked me to invite the nice policeman who helped Daddy come home. She doesn't understand all the details of what happened, but she knows you played a part in our family getting back together. We would be honored if you could join us for her celebration. Marcus discussed the invitation with his wife that evening over dinner. He had shared David's story with her throughout the months that followed their confrontation, and she had been following the family's progress with keen interest. You have to go, she said without hesitation. This man credits you with saving his life and reuniting his family. Sarah, You've talked about this case more than any other incident in your career. It clearly meant something special to you, too. The birthday party was held in a small community center in David's neighborhood. Marcus arrived in civilian clothes, carrying a carefully chosen gift for Sarah, a collection of adventure books that he hoped would inspire her imagination and dreams for the future. When David saw Marcus enter the room, his face lit up with genuine joy and gratitude. He looked completely different from the desperate man Marcus had faced that morning. His posture was straight, his clothes were clean and well-maintained, and most importantly, his eyes held hope instead of despair. "Captain Williams," David said, approaching with his hand extended. "Thank you so much for coming. This means the world to our family." Marcus shook David's hand warmly. "Please call me Marcus. I'm just happy to see you doing so well." A small girl with bright eyes and pigtails came running over, tugging on David's pants leg. "Daddy, is this the nice man you told me about?" "Yes, sweetheart," David said, lifting Sarah into his arms. "This is Marcus, the friend I told you about who helped our family." Sarah studied Marcus with the serious expression that children reserve for important moments. "Daddy said you made it so he could come home to us. Thank you for bringing my daddy back." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your daddy never really left, sweetheart. He just got lost for a little while, but he found his way back because he loves you so much." Jennifer Thompson approached more cautiously, but with genuine warmth in her expression. "Captain Williams, I don't know how to thank you for what you did. David told me about your conversation that day, about how you saw past his actions to the man underneath. Most people wouldn't have taken that risk." "David made it easy," Marcus replied. "I could see that he wasn't a dangerous person, just someone who had run out of hope. All I did was help him remember who he really was." As the party continued, Marcus watched David interact with his children and other family members. The man moved with quiet confidence, participating fully in conversations and clearly cherishing every moment with his daughter and son. It was remarkable to witness such a complete transformation. During the cake ceremony, David stood up to address the gathered family and friends. "I want to take a moment to thank everyone who stood by us during our difficult time," he began, his voice steady and clear. "But I especially want to acknowledge Marcus, who is here with us today. 6 months ago, I made the worst decision of my life, but Marcus saw something in me that I had forgotten existed. He treated me with dignity when I deserved none, and he kept his promise to help me rebuild my life." David turned toward Marcus, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You saved my life that day, but more importantly, you saved my family. Sarah will grow up with her father because you chose compassion over judgment. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the second chance you gave me." The room erupted in applause, and Marcus felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had grown from those tense moments in the palace courtyard. What had started as a potentially tragic confrontation had transformed into a story of redemption, healing, and the power of human connection. As the evening wound down, Sarah presented Marcus with a drawing she had made especially for him. It showed 2 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun, with "Thank you for helping Daddy" written in careful, colorful letters across the top. "This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received," Marcus told her, and he meant every word. Driving home that night, Marcus reflected on the unexpected turns life could take. That morning 6 months ago, he had been a palace guard doing his routine patrol. By evening, he had become part of a story that would change multiple lives forever. The experience had taught him that sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as crises, and that choosing compassion over protocol could create miracles. The story of David Thompson became something of a legend among the palace guard. New recruits were told about the day when talking and listening proved more powerful than force and authority. Marcus often used David's story during training sessions to illustrate the importance of seeing people as individuals rather than just security threats. A year later, David received a promotion at the renewable energy company where he worked. His supervisor noted his reliability, dedication, and natural leadership abilities. The same qualities that had made him an excellent factory worker for 15 years were now helping him build a new career in a growing industry. The Thompson family moved into a larger apartment, and David and Jennifer renewed their wedding vows in a simple ceremony, attended by close friends and family. When asked to speak at the celebration, Marcus shared how witnessing their journey had reinforced his faith in the power of second chances and the resilience of the human spirit. Sarah Thompson, now 10 years old, still waited by the door for her father to come home from work each evening. But now she understood that some things in life were worth waiting for, and that families could be broken and mended, lost and found again. She kept Marcus's business card in her treasure box, along with other precious memenings from important moments in her young life. David began volunteering at a local support center for unemployed workers, sharing his story and offering hope to others facing similar challenges. He never spoke about the details of what had happened at the palace, but he always emphasized the importance of reaching out for help before reaching a breaking point. Marcus continued his career with the palace guard, but his approach to his duties was forever changed. He began carrying business cards for various social services and support organizations, ready to offer practical help alongside security enforcement. His colleagues noticed that he had developed an almost supernatural ability to diffuse tense situations through conversation and empathy. The palace courtyard where the confrontation had taken place remained unchanged, with tourists continuing to take photos and children playing nearby. But for Marcus, it had become a sacred space where he had learned one of life's most important lessons: that every person carries within them both the capacity for desperation and the potential for redemption. Years later, when Marcus looked back on his career, he would remember many important moments and significant achievements. But nothing would ever compare to the morning when a desperate man with a gun taught him that sometimes the greatest act of courage is not drawing your weapon, but putting down your defenses long enough to truly listen to another human being's pain. The unbelievable ending was not that a dangerous criminal was captured or that a security threat was neutralized. The unbelievable ending was that two strangers, brought together by desperation and duty, discovered that understanding and compassion could transform a moment of potential tragedy into a story of hope, healing, and the extraordinary power of human connection. David Thompson never forgot the palace guard who saw past his worst moment to the man he could become again. And Marcus Williams never forgot the desperate father who taught him that sometimes the most important arrests we make are not of criminals, but of the downward spiral of another person's despair.